Chapter 21. Though Mirax's appearance surprised Wedge and had him a bit off balance, Iella took it immediately in stride. She looped an arm through Mirax's and smiled sweetly. "We have some catching up to do, so you boys just follow along and don't you dare try to overhear us." Though her smile remained in place and she kept a light tone in her voice, Wedge read tension and wariness in her eyes. "As you wish, ladies." He sketched a short bow, then followed them to the lifts. They descended in one cage, then headed out onto the rain-slicked promenade. Iella and Mirax chatted and laughed as their path meandered around, entering buildings, stopping at vistas, and going from point to point of interest while always descending. Wedge could tell from the way they traveled that Iella made some choices at random, but others with a purpose. With the frequent stops and passes through clothing boutiques that made him feel uncomfortable, Iella made it very difficult for anyone following them to go unnoticed. Wedge realized that being forced to wait amid racks of women's clothing samples made him uneasy because of more than his gender making him feel utterly out of place there. For the past 7+ years, he had been at war. While there had been relaxing times and he'd been given leaves, he'd never slipped out of his identity of being a pilot. Without family to visit, his parents were dead, and because of his connections to the rebellion, visiting any other relatives would put them in jeopardy. He'd taken time off, but not time away. Wandering through the byways of Coruscant was as close as he had come to what others might see as normal life since his parents were killed. He smiled. Even the time he had put in as a touring hero for the rebellion had been far from normal. He found himself whisked around from planet to planet, banquet to banquet, wearing a dress uniform he didn't even know the rebellion had. At receptions and parties and dinners, he found himself congratulated for his part in the rebellion by creatures he never knew existed before. Gifts had been bestowed upon him, honors given him, and opportunities provided him to do things he'd never had the courage to even dream about as a child. He watched as Iella and Mirax played with a garment fabricator hull unit, lengthening and shortening, trimming and coloring dresses they'd never order. They laughed and were having fun, just the way normal folks do when enjoying a normal life. The word normal stuck in his brain for a moment, and he realized that normal was a goal for most folks that had no definition. When Rogue Squadron's chief tech, Zrai, ran diagnostics on Wedge's X-Wing, normal was defined by a series of benchmark readings established in Alliance specifications and INCOM performance manuals. There was a way to determine if the fighter was performing normally or not, and if it was deficient in some way or other, the defect could be corrected. Normal in terms of life, on the other hand, was not so easy to determine. For Mirax, hauling contraband between worlds was normal, yet to someone like Iella or Corin, that was grossly abnormal behavior. For his parents, normal life had been owning a fueling depot and raising a family. That version of normal, or some minor variation of it, seemed to fit most folks' view of what life should be. But does that mean that anything else is not normal? For him, living the life of a pilot fighting against the Empire seemed normal. Moreover, it seemed to be a life that was based on reality. The Empire, weakened though it was, cast a pall over the entire galaxy, and until it was eliminated, the home, job, and family sort of normal would always be in jeopardy. A hint of wrongdoing could shatter the cocoon of normalcy most people tried to spin around themselves and disrupt their lives forever. Wedge and Pash trailed silently in the women's wake as they moved on. Iella seemed to move a little more deliberately, and as they emerged from a stairwell onto a promenade that hung out over an urban canyon with a river of shadow filling it, a repulsor lift cab came in to stop. The doors opened and Iella motioned them all into it. Wedge didn't recognize the driver, but that somehow made him feel better about the situation than not. Without instruction from Iella, the driver took the vehicle away from the building and down. The route he flew seemed as twisted and circuitous as the one Iella had employed, but the journey ended quickly. The driver dropped them on another walkway, but this one was several kilometers down and away from where they'd been picked up, leaving them submerged in the thick shadows of the Undercity. Iella led them along to an alley, then down and then onto a building. 3 floors up, she opened a door and led them into a sparingly furnished room. Its most impressive features were the two large picture windows that dominated the far walls. They provided the rather panoramic view of the intersection that the apartment overlooked, or underlooked, depending upon one's perspective. Iella closed the door, then nodded towards the two couches that faced each other in the center of the room. Please be seated. Mirax sat with her back to one of the windows and let a slight smile play across her lips. Which do you want first? The story of why I'm here on Coruscant, or how I managed to find you? Iella shrugged easily. Which one will convince me you're not an imp? Wedge frowned. Mirax is clean. I've known her all my life. She's no imp. Convince me. Wedge started to say something, but Mirax cleared her voice. I can handle this, Wedge. Honest. She smiled. I appreciate the caution, especially here. I'll start with the museum and work back only as far as needed. That way you won't know more than you need to. Iella nodded. Coruscant is a world that has billions of people on it. The chances of your being in the right place to spot someone you know are astronomical. Even luck or believing in the Force doesn't begin to cover those odds. Quite true, but I had a house edge on the wager. Mirax jerked a thumb towards Wedge and Pash. They're snub fighter jockeys. Sooner or later, they'd have to go to the Galactic Museum and check out the display that talked about Endor. It's ego, and these pilots can breathe vacuum easier than they let slip a chance to see what lies the enemy is telling about them. Corellian pilots are notorious egotists, so stalking out the museum seemed natural. Wedge arched an eyebrow at Mirax. You think I'm egotistical? Wedge, I love you like a brother, so it hurts me to say this, but you're so egotistical you think you can keep your ego under control. Most of the time you do, which is your only saving grace. And the times you don't, well, I've not been on the receiving edge of a display, but I imagine there are some imps who would regret that experience if they were alive to think about it. Despite the slight sting of her words, Wedge knew there was more truth in them than he really wanted to acknowledge. In the second run at Borlius, he'd let himself be outraged at the tactics the imps thought would stop him from completing his mission. That was quite the display of ego, and they paid a dear price for letting me indulge myself. He turned towards Iella. Well, at least you can tell she knows me. From that explanation, I can tell she knows Corellian pilot. I had a partner who was a hot hand with an X-Wing. If he ever joins the rebellion, he'll give you a run for your credits. Iella looped a lock of brown hair back behind her right ear. Since you didn't run Commander Antilles into Coruscant, you didn't know he was here. That means you brought more pilots in and were figuring they'd visit the museum. Probably more from Rogue Squadron. Mirax inclined her head to the left. You certainly could conclude that scenario is accurate. Oh, I'm sure it is. Iella sat down on the arm of the couch opposite Mirax. Your presence means your exit identity was blown, which means the rest of the pilots could have been compromised somehow. Mirax looked up at Wedge. Are you and I the only folks from Corellia who don't sound like we were trained in deductive reasoning by Corsac? Iella petted Mirax on the knee. I was trained in deductive reasoning by Corsac. So you were part of Corsac? Yes. Why? Mirax sighed and held her hand out. I'm Mirax Tarek. Iella's hand stopped short of sliding into Mirax's grip. You're Booster Tarek's daughter? Mirax's hand dropped back to her lap. I bet you liked it better when you thought I was an imp agent. You'd lose that bet. Iella kept her hand held out. I just joined the Force when Hal Horn put your father away. Booster was smart enough that I can believe his daughter was sharp enough to stake out the museum. And he was lucky enough that I can believe you succeeded in your long shot. I'm Iella Wasiri. Wedge waited for recognition to flash in Mirax's eyes, but she shook Iella's hand without any sign she recognized the name, or knew the woman. Perhaps Corran never spoke to her about his partner, or never named her to Mirax. Iella freed her hand from Mirax's and sat back on the couch. This all complicates things incredibly, but we're on top of them right now, so it's not a crippling emergency. This place is a safe house. I've called in someone who I expected to use to help debrief you and interrogate you if necessary. We'll still need the debriefing, of course, but we needed to determine where to start assessing the damage to our operation here. Your problems could have a perfectly innocent explanation, but because they involve the Empire, I doubt that entirely. I don't know what happened, really, Mirax shrugged. I made the arrangements as per usual with a broker. That gives me an identity code and the window for an exit vector. I enter 3 flight plans or so, get clearance on them, then head out. This time, when I tried to use the ID to enter the flight plans from a public datapad, things locked up. I cleared out and M-Security landed on the place. It was down in the Invisisac, so I created quite the stir. I turned around and burned some favors my father had earned with Black Sun to get my ship and crew taken care of. Since then, I've been looking for a friendly face. Iella's brown eyes focused on the window behind Mirax for a second. Sounds like the imps got the controller who was entering ID codes. Your broker insulated you from direct discovery, but when you used the code, they found you. We can get some slicers backtracking things and see how bad the situation has become. That means bringing in folks who have the skills. I don't, and for that, we have to wait. Pash sat down beside Mirax. While we wait, I think we've got a serious problem to figure out how to handle. Mirax frowned. What can be more serious than the imps knowing members of Rogue Squadron are on Coruscant? Wedge smiled. If the imps find out why we're here, they can take steps to make the conquest of Coruscant impossible. That, my dear Mirax, is about as serious as it gets. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.